One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the bases out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, our next guest is someone who showed up on the show a couple of years ago, Sam Kahn Jr., the techspert from The Athletic. Sam, appreciate you joining the show. I don't know if you remember, the first time I had you on, the connection was really weird. I was in between leases on my apartment and the apartment that I'm in now with my wife. I was just trying to get a Wi-Fi signal from my parents' game room. So I appreciate you not leaving the call back then. I appreciate you joining a much more stable connection tonight. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I actually, before I got on here, I made sure to turn the Wi-Fi off and plug in the hardline Ethernet because just like you, and we've done our podcast at The Athletic in the past, if you're on a shaky connection, good luck because we're trying to do all this stuff over the video stream, and it is a little bit problematic if you don't have a good solid connection. So when I have the hard line in, I know I'm good to go. So I made sure I tested it before we logged on that I turned it on and it was running like a dream. So hopefully we're incident free tonight.
Yeah, a pro's pro. We've all been there. I was sweating bullets. I said it then. I'll say it again. You were one of the first authors that got me to subscribe to The Athletic all the way back. So a ton of respect for you and the work that you do. For those that aren't familiar with your work, whether in Texas or the rest of the college football fandom, let them know where they can find you here before we get started.
Yeah, theathletic.com, our college football page. We obviously have a great staff of 20-plus writers covering college football, and I'm one of them, obviously. I mostly cover college football in the state of Texas, but also help out with some of our Big 12 and SEC coverage and our transfer portal coverage as well. So that's where to be, theathletic.com. Read and subscribe.
I don't say this lightly. That is the only paid subscription that I still have to this day. It's the only one I'm willing to pay for. So take it from me. The Athletic, they know what they're doing over there. They do fantastic work. And, Sam, we have to start with a piece that one of your colleagues over at The Athletic penned, Stu Mandel. We're going to get to all things state of Texas and football in the Lone Star State. But news coming out here over the last 24 hours or so that the SEC and the Big Ten are set to meet in New Orleans. And it's kind of, widely agreed upon that this is about to be a takeover of college football, that the SEC and the Big Ten are about to rewrite the playoff and what that looks like in 2026 and beyond. What have you heard about that? And what do we kind of know at this moment in time?
Yeah, I've heard what everyone else has heard is that the Big Ten and SEC don't need unanimity to make changes to the college football playoff format beyond 2026. Obviously, before the original contract expires in 26, you need a unanimous vote from the 10 commissioners plus Notre Dame to make changes to the format. But starting in 26, with this deal that those two conferences worked out where they were able to get a larger share of the revenue pool and also a little bit more power in the decision-making process. That's where we're headed. And so the sport is going to be controlled essentially by those two conferences. And I'm not a fan of it. I don't like it at all because I don't think it's necessary. Like when we talk about guaranteeing automatic bids, more than one to a conference, I just think it's a poor and a misguided path to travel because you're essentially I think taking value away from winning. You're saying that this league, wins in this league matter more than wins in another league. And I understand the strength of schedule, and I understand the history, how many championships have been won by the SEC, and how many draft picks have come out of there. But the past does not always dictate what the future is going to be. And as we should be plenty aware of, is the last 2 national championship games have not included an SEC team. They have included Big Ten team. Obviously, you had Ohio State last year, and then we had Notre Dame and Independent, and then the year before you had Michigan and Washington, both now Big Ten teams. Obviously, Washington a Pac-12 team at the time, but I'm not a fan of it. Stu wrote a great column. If you guys haven't read it, go to theathletic.com. I think he put it way more eloquently than I ever could, but I think it's wholly unnecessary because I think if we were to expand and just do at-larges, the Big Ten and the SEC were going to gobble up most of the spots anyway. I don't know why we have to codify it. I think that if you're the Big 12 and the ACC, the fact that you are guaranteed 2, I think is a positive for them because now there are going to be years where they maybe only get 1. So getting 2 guaranteed is a plus for them. But I just don't like it. I think if you wanted to expand the playoff, we have a great system that is used by a division just below the FBS and the FCS. I think that one is perfectly fine to use if you wanted to go the route of expanding any more than 12. But obviously, we're doing things a lot differently in the FBS and the power conferences, thanks to the Big Ten and the SEC.
Yeah, I think the title of that column is that they're essentially setting college football aflame, right? And I think is a great picture because, as you mentioned, and as Stu mentioned, a lot of those slots would have been taken by Big Ten and SEC teams anyway, right? I mean, and the ranking system is still likely going to be through the committee. I don't think I've heard anything about that going anywhere anytime soon. And so we know that SEC and Big Ten teams are going to get that benefit of the doubt because of the strength of schedule, because of the brand on their chest. But now, to me, this devalues the regular season potentially more so than expansion in its most general form ever did.
Yeah, 100%. Because, like we said, we're to have a 4th SEC team. There are going to be years where a 4th SEC team probably doesn't deserve to be in, or a 4th Big Ten team. Yep. I mean, how many times in the past have we seen? I'll take the Big Ten for example. How many times have we had a year where the top was very heavy with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and then you had a gap between everybody else? Maybe Wisconsin was good, or maybe there was another team in there. Maybe Michigan State was good, but were they good enough to be a team that you say, hey, they should have an opportunity to play for a national championship over a team that wins a conference that maybe wins 10 or 11 games in another conference? I'll say this from the start. I have always been a fan of what I like to call the Dan Wetzel Death to the BCS model, which he wrote about in that book. If anybody's read Death to BCS, you know what I'm talking about. It was something that he proposed 15 years ago. It was 2010, I think, around the time this book came out. And it was very simple. Give every FBS conference champion 1 bid and fill the rest with at-larges. It's that simple. And so in this model, 12 is probably not enough. You'd have to go to 16. So we have, I think, 9 or 10 conferences right now. So you give those conference champions a bid, and then you give at-larges to the rest. If you want more of your power conferences in, then like I said, the FCS has a 24 team, and you can give a bunch of at-larges and still give your 9 or 10 conference champions an auto bid. And we don't have to do the whole seeding thing with the conference champions like we did before. You could seed them just 1 through 24 or 1 through 16, however you want to seed them through schedules or metrics or what have you. But the access is the point of it, because college football, in my opinion, so much of it is about hope. It's about selling the hope and the dream and the fact that you can play your way in and that you can win a national championship, or that you can at least have the opportunity to compete for it. And by distributing automatic bids in this way, you're casting secondary status to other leagues. And so you're devaluing the wins in those leagues, and you're also devaluing the wins in the SEC and the Big Ten, because you're saying, well, you don't have to win as many. And like I said, and like you said, we were already giving them that benefit of the doubt. Why else are we belly aching about Alabama, 3-loss Alabama or 3-loss Ole Miss getting left out? Were there any other 3-loss teams in non-Big Ten or non-SEC conferences getting that kind of lobbying on their behalf? No. BYU, that's lost 2 games, that had a really good resume that's pretty comparable to the one SMU had. I didn't hear a peep about BYU, and they only had 2 losses, and they had a very, very good season, and in my opinion, deserves some consideration for the bracket, but got virtually none. But yet we're belly aching about Alabama missing it or Ole Miss missing it with 3 losses. That is the strength of schedule component. We're giving you the extra loss and still considering you because of your schedule, which I also call a little BS on, because they're only playing 8 conference games, not 9. Now,
Right.
with this new format, they're saying they're going to play 9, which I think is good, but they're only going to do 9 because they're going to codify 4 bids. And if they were on an even playing field with a conference like the Big Ten or the old Pac-12, which were both playing 9, I would have liked to have seen that happen before we start talking about adding more auto bids. But I don't run the sport. Nobody asks my opinion of it, when it comes to power brokers or people that actually care about it. I'm saddened by it because, people talk about all these things that affect the sport and impact the sport negatively. And I think a lot of it is overblown in terms of the portal and NIL. I think some of that stuff, obviously it's a little uneven and it's a little chaotic, but I think in the long run, all that stuff is going to be a net positive for the sport. I certainly don't like the player movement to be as frequent as it is, but I don't think it destroys the sport. To me, it's things like this that destroy the sport. It is having a conference so big that they're on 2 different coasts and that you have to travel across country to play a conference game, or it's having the TV networks have such control and influence to where we kill a conference, essentially, which we did with the Pac-12 a couple years ago. Or it's codifying automatic bids for one conference but not for another. These are the things in my mind that will do long-term damage that can, I don't know, kill the sport, but can severely damage it, more so than anything we've seen with portal or NIL or player movement.
It's, what saddens me the most, Sam, is politics have always existed in sports. We know that, or at least those of us that pay attention know that, right? If you keep your eyes open, you know that there are external influences moving the chess pieces around the board. But we had the Luka trade just a couple of weeks ago that was so obviously a political movement by that new Maverick ownership, right? A gun held to the head of the Texas legislature. Now this move very much to me feels like check, where the SEC and the Big Ten are just a couple of moves away from their in-game, which in my estimation is creating a 2 super conference league. Is that overblown to think at this point?
No, I don't think so. I don't know how long it takes to get there or what the process will be to get there, but let's be honest, the language that you hear from Greg Sankey, especially after the first try at the 12-team playoff got scuttled because of the expansion of Texas and OU, the language that you would hear him use about how what their position was on that and the forming the alliance and all that stuff, you could tell, you could just read between the lines that A, he wasn't happy that the playoff didn't get approved the first time around when they proposed it, and B, that they're prepared to take their ball and go home if they need to. And part of me wishes that some of the other conferences had called their bluff and let them do it, because I don't like the sport being held hostage by 2 conferences. To me, it's unnecessarily and patently unfair, because again, we're talking about, yes, they are the big brands and they are the really successful programs and they account for a lot of the national championships, but this thing is cyclical. It's not, I don't think it's always going to be the same, that the teams that we see now that are succeeding are always going to be the ones. I mean, I remember in 2008 and the mid to late 2000s, the Big 12 was as good or as any conference out there. Texas was winning national championships. OU was going to national championship games. They won one, obviously, back in 2000. I remember I referenced the 08 season because I remember there was a time where 5 of those teams were in the top 15 in the rankings.
Yeah.
I remember
great
around the
season.
time of that Texas upset in Lubbock, that was 2 top 10 teams, and that the Missouri was really good, Oklahoma State was really good, Oklahoma was good, Texas Tech, you name it. And obviously the Big 12 doesn't look like that anymore. But I say that to say that these things are cyclical. And so that's, again, goes back to why I just don't like that they codified it this way, because what if it changes? What if the SEC, what if the NIL and transfer portal, the way it's evened out the depth across teams a little bit, what if it weakens the conference enough that the conference isn't that deep at the top? Maybe it's just top heavy with a couple teams at the top that are really, really good. And what if it's kind of mushy in the middle? And so all that to say, to answer your question, are we headed for a 2-team or 2-conference Super League eventually? I don't know, but certainly this is a step closer to it. This is a way for them to kind of have their cake and eat it too, right? It's a way for them to have that type of control and status while still playing in the sandbox with everyone else. But they can still kind of hold that there, and they're getting more money, they're getting more berths, they're getting everything in their favor. At the same time, they can always take it and go do their own thing at some point, because they're going to have the programs in that conference are going to have the financial wherewithal to it. The question I have, and this is unanswerable at this point, is will there ever come a point where the biggest brands in those conferences, will they break off? Maybe it wasn't not just those 2 conferences, but as a whole, but maybe it's just the big brands of those 2 conferences who say, well, do we really need these schools at the bottom of our conference that are consistently at the bottom of our conference, or that don't have the brand value that we do? And maybe we should just form our own thing with just the, kind of similar to what the Super League was supposed to be in European football, which of course the fans there revolted against it and it never came to be. But I think if they were to try that here, I think it'd have a lot more chance of succeeding, because I don't think the fan revolt would be as strong as the one we saw that killed the one in Europe.
At that point, if we do get to a Super League, do we still call it college football? I mean, is it at that point? It's not an amateur. It's not even an amateur game at this point, really. But at that point, I mean, I think we're pronouncing time of death on college football. I think you could pronounce time of death on college football as we know it now, quite frankly, just with everything that we have clearly kickstarted, everything that's in the motion behind the scenes. It's no longer about the traditions and the pageantry and everything that we experience on the field. Maybe it never was. Maybe that was just the byproduct of, these alliances not being big enough and strong enough. The TV deals not being there. Right. But yeah, it feels like a dark day for college football, for the fans, for those that cover it. I mean, I can't assume that you're just overjoyed by this as you've been talking here.
Yeah, not at all. I think what really, I'll tell you when it hit me. It wasn't today. It was when the Pac-12 died. That to me was the line of demarcation for this sport.
Conference champions.
We allowed a power conference to die. And the reason I say that too is because that was not unprecedented. I remember when the Southwest Conference died. That to me was something I never thought would happen. That conference had 80 years of history and Heisman winners and great coaches and great national champions and some innovation coming out of that conference, whether it was the wishbone or the veer, and the run and shoot came out of that, which kind of was a precursor to the air raid. And so the Pac-12's death reminded me so much of the Southwest Conference because so many of the same factors were at play. TV money, market value, brand power, and all these things. And this time there were 2 schools left in the wilderness, Oregon State and Washington State. And before in the Southwest Conference, it was 4 with SMU, TCU, Rice, and Houston. But the fact that we allowed that to happen, it forever changed it for me. And again, I go back to, it wasn't NIL and it wasn't the portal. It wasn't, those things didn't make me feel like we were going away from what college football should be, because I think those were long overdue. The NIL, especially just because of how much money has gotten into the sport. But when you killed that conference, and then the Big Ten is no longer 11 teams or even 14, it's 18 teams now.
Mm-hmm.
And the SEC is 16 teams now, and the ACC is 17 teams with 2 in California. What are we doing? That to me, that was when we got to that, and it still is college football, but to me, that was a line of demarcation of, but this has changed forever, and I don't know that there's any going back, because to me, it was always a regional game.
Yes.
Because what was great about the Southwest Conference, you could drive to almost every road game.
Sure.
You could drive to almost every. The only one is if you lived in Austin or you lived in Houston, and maybe driving to Arkansas was a little bit of a hike, but otherwise you could drive to almost every game, and every team hated each other because they were so close to each other, and you went to school, or you went to high school with these people, or you shared offices with these people. Do you think guys the guys at Duke and guys at Cal are sharing offices, or they're talking trash about ACC football? Let's be real. And so that's what made college football and college sports so great, was the regionality and the proximity and the relationships and the attachment to your school. And we kill that because of expanding, because everybody's looking for more money in the TV pie. And that's the other thing, is like, when is enough? Like, why do we need $250 million to run an athletic department these days? It doesn't cost that much. I can promise you can run an athletic department for less than that. But we got Florida State, who tried to, who does more than $150 million in athletic revenue, trying to cry broke to go get in the SEC. Like, what are we doing? What are we talking about here? And so, I do hope at some point, whatever the end deal is, I still hope there is that the players are still part of the school. They're still students. They're still, because that too is a part of the attachment. Is like, these are. Sure. Players that are, ostensibly go to class, and they're part of the school and the traditions and all that. I know the player movement has changed a lot of that, but that was part of one of the attachments too, is like, these guys are doing things that we did when we went to college, and so as long as they're still students, and as long as we're still working, that keeps a semblance of it. But also, I hope that we still stick to the school, that this not being a minor league, so to speak. Like, I'm okay with paying players and all that stuff. I think that's great, but I just don't want it to turn into, like you said, 32 teams, and or 40 teams, or let's just pick however many we're going to pick and just break them all off. And no, that's I am willing to watch North Texas and UTSA as much as I may be more interested in that game than I am watching Georgia and Ohio State. You want to know why? Because I've probably watched a bunch of the North Texas and UTSA guys play high school football.
Yep.
Somewhere in this state where I live.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy that. Like, Frank Harris, he'll never be a nationally known name, but Frank Harris at UTSA will be a legend in San Antonio forever. And anybody who watched that guy play in his 7 years at UTSA will appreciate what that guy laid on the line for the program. And to me, when we just concentrate all the power and all the interest in just a few big brands, we lose that. And to me, that's what makes it exciting. Like, I went to University of Houston. I remember watching Kevin Cobb help bring that program back from the dead.
Sure.
He was a true freshman and took him to a bowl game in 2003, 2 years after they had gone 0-11. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget sitting in the stands, because when I was a student there, when they were 0-11, there weren't very many students in the stands. Then all of a sudden they went to a bowl game, and then 4 years, and by the time Cobb was a senior, they won a Conference USA championship, and the stadium was filled and it was packed. And I never thought I'd see that stadium filled, because they were so bad before that. Those things stick with you as a college fan. So those are and to forsake that just so the SEC teams can have 29% of the revenue in the playoff and extra auto bids, it's ridiculous, and it does sadden me.
Well, I mean, for those of us here in the state of Texas, really easy to look at what's going down in Arlington and, the disaster that the Cowboys have been lately, and think, we want to go to that? You want to take, like you mentioned, the personal connection, right? I mean, Heck, going to class with Miles Garrett and watching him write
Getting dunked on
in
at
class.
the rec center by Miles Garrett.
Yes, and dunking on folks on a half-constructed basketball court in the rec. Like, that was what drew us in. That was what made sure, even if you weren't a diehard sports fan, you know what? You felt that connection. You felt connected to the baseball team because you guys were all doing group projects together. And so on a Tuesday night when it's 25 degrees, you end up at the ballpark watching them play, right? Those kind of connections are what make college sports great. And for us to kind of whitewash that in the name of, making this a professional sports league, and like you said, all the
maximizing
politics,
television revenue.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the thing that gives me hope, and we'll move on to happier things. I promise. I've got a list of questions. A lot of them. Yes, a lot of them submitted by you guys, the listeners. The thing that gives me hope. You mentioned you being interested in watching North Texas UTSA because you watch those kids in high school. You're connected to them. I do believe that we'll always find a way to create those stories, to make those connections, and to hope, right? I mean, that's hope springs eternal. And right now that means hoping that, my team can make it to 9-10 wins, even though they are destined for 8-4 every single year. That's just a fact at this point.
Yeah. And Cam Ward's an example of that too. When we talk about the portal era, Cam Ward at Incarnate Word with his terrific season there, and then he goes on to Washington State, and then he ends up becoming a Heisman contender at Miami, and he could be the number one pick. Like, even though the player movement and things have changed it, those stories still exist, and it's still there. Like, he's from just down the road in West Columbia, about an hour plus away from where I live. And, I know his dad and everything, and I remember watching him on ESPN Plus at UIW, like turning on because like, hey, Cam Ward's playing. And now he may be the number one pick. That stuff will still exist, I think. I hope. But yeah, it's unfortunate. But yeah, let's talk some football, man. Let's talk actual football because that's what we're here for, right?
Let's do that. So you are the Techspert. So a lot of these questions, I wanted to make sure they were about the Lone Star State, and a lot going on in Texas, right? You have 2 teams make the playoff. You have a couple of other teams seemingly on the rise. And so I think the first question that our listeners wanted to know, how optimistic are you about Texas football, the Longhorn program, over the next 5 years in terms of a championship contender? They've gotten so close the last 2 years, but always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Now they've lost a ton, right? This team is not the same going into 2025 that they have been in 23 or 24. So how do you like the direction of this Texas program? And can you see the Longhorns raising a trophy, a national championship trophy in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, certainly in the short term. Obviously, with Arch Manning stepping in at quarterback, you really like his talent. So the potential and the ceiling, I think, in the short term, this next year or two, if he's here for 2 more years, I really like their chances. I think Steve Sarkisian has done a great job, him and his staff, with that roster of continuously recruiting high-level talent and building depth. The thing that impressed me the most about this program, especially this year, was they lost 11 draft picks and then went right back to the semifinals in a deeper playoff bracket. That told me how well this team has been recruited and developed. They are not living in the portal. They are picking and choosing 5 to 7 guys and filling gaps where they need to. But otherwise, they are doing it the old-fashioned way. High-level recruiting and develop them and play them when they're ready to play. That's a winning formula. If you're going, I still think that's the way to win. And you're going to supplement and plug your holes in the portal. So that's kind of the new formula. The old way of doing it, of just recruit. But now whatever holes that you have or whatever misses you have in an evaluation standpoint, you plug them in the portal, and Texas can go to bat with anybody in there because they have a very deep pockets and they have a very well organized collective. So I'm pretty optimistic over them certainly next 2 to 3 years. And then beyond that, I think it's hard to forecast anything beyond that in college football because as quickly as the roster change over and all that. But I will say this, as long as Steve Sarkisian's there, I feel pretty good because I think I think he's kind of hit the stride. You can tell he's got them believing. There's confidence. There's a development plan. And those two coordinators are still there. I mean, he's still got Pete Kwiatkowski. He's still got Kyle Flood. He's still got his quarterback coach in AJ Milwee. This is going to be interesting this year to watch, though, because there is a little bit of staff changeover. He's getting picked off now. I see you got NFL teams coming over, hiring Tashard Choice, and you got other schools trying to pick off his staff. So Blake Gideon went over to Georgia Tech. That is one of the reasons too why Texas has been so successful these last couple of years. They had very little staff movement. They have been able to retain all their guys. The more you win, that harder that is to do. One thing that's a really, really big plus in Steve Sarkisian's corner, Pete Kwiatkowski, not really a guy with head coach aspirations. I talked to him. I did a story on him right before the Cotton Bowl when they played Ohio State, and I spent a lot of time with him at media day before the Peach Bowl against Arizona State. And he said he didn't really have an interest in being a head coach. He likes ball and he wants to teach, and he said now even he didn't really have a lot of interest in before, and he goes now with what the head coach's duties are now, a lot of it is not football, a lot of it is administrative. He's like, I'm not really interested in that. So that guy is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. So Steve's going to be able to probably keep him for a long time unless an NFL team wants to hire him. But unless an NFL team comes calling, PK is probably going to be there for a while. So if you keep your offensive play caller and your defensive coordinator for a while, I like your chances. So I think Texas is in pretty good shape. You got Arch here for a year or two. Then you're going to move on to probably either Trey Owens or KJ Lacey. I love what I saw from Trey in the limited action that we've seen from him. And then KJ, obviously, we'll see, but very highly recruited, Mr. Football in the state of Alabama, really smooth passer, one of the best pure passers out there in the 2025 class. So, and Steve Sarkisian's track record quarterbacks, pretty spotless. So I think you got to feel really good about where they are from a roster standpoint, foundational. And then as we move to the rev share era, they're going to be financially ready to compete, to do whatever they need to do. So I think the fact that they were able to get back and not just make it a one-hit wonder in 23, and they were able to get back and make a run at it again, I think that's built a foundation where they can make a really good long-term run here.
You mentioned Arch Manning a couple of times there, and he's been anointed the chosen one for so long now. So the expectations on Arch Manning, are they fair or overblown headed into 2025?
I think it depends on what your expectations are. If you're expecting him to be one of the top quarterbacks in the country or be an all SEC caliber guy, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair expectation because, look, he was the number one recruit in the country, and we've only seen a limited action of him. But I think if you've watched this game long enough and you know what great quarterbacks look like, he checks a lot of the boxes, from arm strength, being able to drive the ball, accuracy, decision-making, athleticism. The guy can move. We've seen that with his legs. He's really good athlete. Big, strong, great frame. And we know he's, because of his pedigree, is in the family that he comes from. And then you talk to people around that program. You talk to Sark. You talk to the other players. The guy studies the game. He knows what he's doing, operating the offense. When I saw from year one to year two, I remember his freshman year, the little bit that we saw of him, you could tell it was moving fast. You could tell he was swimming a little bit. And then this year you see him play, and it's like, oh, he knows what he's doing now. He knows, and he's willing to take chances too. And that's I think that's going to be the thing that's be interesting with him is, I think he's got so much confidence in his ability to drive the ball and get it to where he needs to get. He's going to try and force in some windows, which may lead to some picks from time to time. So I'm going to be fascinated to see what that balance is, but I think that's fair. Now, if you're expecting him to step in this year and win the Heisman and be the number one pick in 2026 draft, let's pump the brakes. He's only started a couple of games. He's going to make mistakes. He doesn't have a ton of game reps. He's got a lot of development. He's been lying in the weeds for 2 years. He got a little bit of seasoning this year as the backup with a couple starts and some spot action here and there. But look, he's a young quarterback, and young quarterbacks in college football are going to make mistakes. They're going to throw picks. They're going to maybe have a loss or two. It's going to happen. I think as a viewing public, I think we get carried away sometimes with how quickly we want to anoint quarterbacks. I think of how quickly Oklahoma pulled the plug on Jackson Arnold. I think of how quickly things turned over there for another quarterback of that program, Spencer Rattler. You look at some of the freshmen that get thrown into the fire quickly. You even look at it in the NFL. You look at first round draft picks and how quickly they get thrown into fire, and then guys pull the plug on them. I think we do a disservice to quarterbacks sometimes. And Arch had the great fortune of being able to not start right away and sit and learn and develop. And I think that's going to do so much for him. So I don't think would it shock me, I guess, if he blew it out and ended up being the Heisman winner in 2025. I guess not, but I'm expecting him to be a really good quarterback, a top 10 quarterback in the country. I think when you look at the talent that's going to be around him, his natural ability, the guy calling plays for him, the scheme, the whole nine, I think it's fair to expect him to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country this year.
It's a good thing I haven't built this brand on clickbait and funny TikToks, because that was way too level-headed. If that's how I was building that, that's way too well reasoned there, Sam. No, I could not agree with you more. I think your analysis, even touching on the development and the issue that the NFL is having with their quarterbacks, I think is spot on. Different topic for a different pod. Last question for you on Texas, and this was one that a listener submitted. Is Texas and Oklahoma still like the premier rivalry down here in college football? Because Oklahoma has not showed up a couple times lately.
Yeah, I think so. Just because the history is the continuous history is so long, and Red River is still such an event. I look forward to it every year. It doesn't matter if one team is good and one team is not. It's just special, man. Going to the state fair, going to the Cotton Bowl, the old Cotton Bowl, not the game, the stadium, which is a little bit old and decrepit, but it's still standing. You can still see it when you get on 75 or 45 South. When I'm heading back to Houston, you can see the Cotton Bowl from the highway as you're leaving downtown Dallas, and you see Fair Park. I love the event itself. I hope it never changes, because if it ever got moved from there, or if it ever went away, I'd be really sad, just because there's just a feeling when you walk on the fairgrounds for that game. It's unlike anything else. But yeah, from a competitive standpoint, this is a huge year for OU. They've got to turn it around. 2 years of 6-win seasons in the span of 3 years. Oklahoma's not used to being bad. They're not used to being mediocre. They're used to winning. They're used to winning and contending for titles. And so this is going to be a big year for them. But no, it's still, to me, Texas OU is still the big one. But the return of Texas A&M was much needed. I hate that it was gone for 13 years. It was unfortunate. It was unnecessary, in my opinion. But hard feelings went into play, and a lot of nonsense in the interim. And I'm glad we got it back. It was one of the most memorable experiences to be there at Kyle Field for the reunion of that game in November, on November 30th. I loved it. The atmosphere was electric. It's going to be electric next year when they go back to DKR. I can't wait to be at it at that time. So I'm glad that that's back. But yeah, I think Texas and OU still is number one on the list in this region.
Yeah. Speaking of the folks in College Station, grade Mike Elko's first season at Texas A&M, off to a rip-roaring start. And then, like so many A&M teams of the past, certainly the ones when I was there under Kevin Sumlin, they collapsed in November. Did that sour your experience under Mike Elko in year one, or were you able to see the positives looking forward?
Yeah, I was not expecting them to be playing for a berth in the SEC championship game at the end of the season, which they had the opportunity to go into that Texas game. So I thought, obviously, the record is not what you want, and they end up losing the bowl game. So the ending to the season, like you said, very reminiscent of 2014, 2015, 2016 Texas A&M.
Brutal.
Long live Trevor Knight's collarbone from when he dove over the pylon against Mississippi State.
That one hurts deep.
Yeah. I'll never forget it. But I'll give Elko a solid B. I thought he did a good job of making lemonade with not as many lemons as you think he had, because we had this perception of the talent on the roster that he inherited, and that did not match the reality. You want to know why? Look at the list of combine invitees to the NFL draft. Texas A&M only has 3. 3 guys invited to the NFL combine. You know how many Texas has? Texas has 14. So that tells you how much talent is hollowed out on that roster because of how it's been managed. Remember that 2022 recruiting class that was number one of all time?
Sure do.
You know how many guys are still on the roster at this point?
Like 4 or 5, right?
You can count on one hand. I think it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, wait. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 5 or 6. But I'll tell you this. You know how many have transferred out of that? There were 30 guys in that class. You know how many have transferred out? 22.
It's ridiculous.
22 of them have transferred out or have not finished their career there. One is finished. Shamar Stewart's going to the draft.
Mm-hmm.
22 have transferred out, and then the rest are still in the program.
And what if the guys that have transferred out, what have they done elsewhere, right? I mean, it's not, for the most part.
There's a few. Walter Nolan had a good year at Ole Miss.
Absolutely.
LT Overton had a good
Absolutely.
year at
There's
Alabama.
some gems in there, but the historic class in its grandeur came nowhere close to meeting what we thought it was going to be, right?
Right. And so the reason I bring that up is 22 class should have been third-year players on campus. That means that should have been when Elko's team that he took over, that should have been your juniors and your third-year sophomore. That should be the bulk of your team. Like, you're obviously going to have some senior leadership and some guys that are older, but the meat of your roster should have been that class. It's not there. They're not there. They're gone. And so when you watch that opener and they played against Notre Dame and receivers couldn't get open to save their lives, that was when I knew. And, when I bring that up, Evan Stewart, he's at Oregon now. They could have certainly used Evan Stewart on opening night. They could have used Evan Stewart all season. That was a problem. And so when you look at when they go to the portal and they go get Casey Concepcion and they go to recruiting class and they go get a 5-star receiver, or they go get a receiver from Mississippi State, or they go get Micah Hudson from Texas Tech. There's a reason for that, because there wasn't a lot of receiver talent. Kudos to Mike Elko for not throwing his team under the bus, but at the end of the regular season, I asked him whether the fact that if they couldn't get receivers open, is that a personnel issue? And it's like, no, it's not. And then you turn around and sign all the receivers. Yes, it is. You're just public. You're not gonna throw your guys under the bus. So hey, kudos to you for your professionalism. But hey, the actions speak louder than words here. So I say all that to say I give them a solid B, because this team is not as talented as we thought it was. They had a really good defensive line talent, which at the same time wasn't as productive as it should have been. They had subpar receiver talent. They did not have elite receivers. And then the quarterback situation was a little bit of a yo-yo, because Connor Wegman's hurt, and then Marcel Reed plays well, but then Connor comes back, and then he blows it out in his Mizzou and looks like we think Connor Wegman will look, and then they bench him, and then you go back to Marcel Reed, who looks fantastic against LSU, and then kind of up and down as we finish the year. But for all that to happen and still be in the conversation to be in the SEC championship game, I thought was pretty solid. So I think it's a solid, good foundational start. And beyond just the on-field results, I think they've done a really good job of rebuilding that roster, because the one thing that I think really hurt A&M coming into this year was that those last 2 years, the Jimbo Fisher era, the roster management was really piss poor. It was lack of utilizing the portal really throughout most of his tenure. He finally went into it his last year just because they didn't have enough scholarship guys and they needed some depth. But a bad recruiting class, not utilizing the portal, not really balancing the roster in terms of, like, you're recruiting all these defensive linemen and then you look at your receiver depth and it's not there. Really poor roster management. So Elko took over, I think, a little bit more of a mess than people realize, and I think he did a pretty good job in year one.
I think he's done a tremendous job immediately adding to those position groups, the skill position groups, like you mentioned. I mean, running back is going to be a lot of fun to watch. We'll see what happens along the offensive and defensive lines. They've certainly brought in enough talent to, refill those rooms. And, will Micah Hudson show up? I don't know. We'll see whatever's going on there. I keep hearing people saying he's in College Station. No, he's in Lubbock. It is what it is. We'll see.
Yeah, we need to find that out. I will tell you this: I'm excited about year 2 of Terry Bussey. He only got to play some bit role, but of all the guys in that receiver room that were there last year, he's the one who's got some juice and some electricity that I really like. And so as he gets more adapted to the college game and the scheme, and I know there's a lot of A&M fans down on Colin Klein. I love Colin Klein. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a great play caller. I think once the personnel fits his scheme a little bit more, I don't think Connor Wegman really fit what Colin wants to do. I think Marcel fits that scheme a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I think as they settle in, some of the stuff that he does in the run game, I think it's going to be really, really effective once they get the hang of it. But I'm excited about Terry Bussey year two. I think once he really figures it out, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch him.
Shout out to Timpson High School there, Terry Bussey.
That's right. They'll do everything, Mister. You want to talk about Mr. Football? That guy did everything except sell popcorn at Timpson.
He was electric to watch and to get to cover. Certainly one of those I was there when guys that I'll tell my kids about. Let's come back to the Dallas area. We've talked about Texas and Texas A&M, but SMU made the playoff. Rhett Lashley has built that program into as good of a championship contender as they've been in a long, long time, since they were giving out cars under the table, right? Is SMU here to stay, or was 2024 just a one-hit wonder?
No, I think as long as Rhett Lashley is there, I think they're in good shape. I have to give him a lot of credit for not only taking a program that was good and keeping it there, but elevating it and doing it in the first year of the ACC, first year in a power conference. I think anybody can go look at statistically the numbers when a team goes from a conference that, like a group of 5 type conference to a power conference. It's not typically, you're not having a lot of success. Even the power conference to power conference moves often don't work out very well. At least in the first year, to go 11-3, play in the ACC title game and earn a playoff berth. And, oh, by the way, making the critical decision to change your quarterback early in the season, to go away from the guy who got you a conference championship in Preston Stone, and to have the guts and the confidence to say, you know what, we love you, Preston, but we got a guy who we think is going to take us to an even higher level. I don't think people appreciate how hard that is to do, especially when you consider what Preston Stone meant to that program as a recruit.
Yes.
When he committed to them, it was a huge deal because he was, I think at the time, I believe the highest ranked recruit in the last 20 years to commit to SMU. And all the numbers and all the success he had, and to go to Kevin Jennings, and it was the right move because look what Kevin Jennings did. But beyond that, they have attacked the roster with such precision, a really intelligent strategy. It's not just, yes, they do have a lot of foreign Power 4 players, but they're looking for guys that fit. There's a reason why a lot of former Miami guys are there. It's because they played for Rhett. They know that system. He's got familiarity with them. There's guys on that staff that still have connections down there. And then obviously they're still recruiting the heck out of the state of Texas. And also you look at the depth. You look at, okay, you've had, we have all these running backs, and then you had a guy who was kind of a receiver, and then all of a sudden Brashard Smith explodes, and it's like, wow, look at this guy.
Yeah.
You look at the defensive line and how well they have stocked up front. That to me was the biggest thing, because a lot of G5 teams you see, they are really good at the offensive skill positions, and maybe you got a 1 or 2 in the trenches that are good, but it's hard to sustain it across. Now that's a legit D-line that SMU has. And they've got speed all over the field. So the roster strategy has been terrific. They've executed really well. I think Rhett's a good play caller. And I think he's got the right kind of attitude that you need to have in this type of job. So I think they're here for a while. And of course, as we have to talk about, when we talk about futures, I didn't talk about it with Tech. I didn't talk about it with A&M. I definitely talked about it with Texas. The money, man. You got to have the money, man, in your back pocket. And SMU's always had that. So they've got the commitment there. Bill Armstrong, what check I got to write to make this happen? And they're making it happen over there from an NIL standpoint and facility standpoint. They do in the end zone facility at the new stadium. So I think they are back now that they're back with the big boys in a power conference. I think they're here to hang around for a while.
Which is so good. I've been to a number of SMU games over the last couple of years, was in the press box when they lost to BYU. And at least in my section of the press box, everyone was thinking it's the Kevin Jennings move. Okay, well, The offensive line is struggling, so this is really a survival tactic. But the conversation as we walked down to the press conference and then walked out of the stadium was not, yeah, SMU is going to recover from this. It's, okay, how many wins do we get? And is this year a disappointment? So credit to Lashley, his conviction, the guys for rallying around it. You know, they took accountability, right? The defense said, we played well. We've got to play better. The offense obviously had to stop the turnovers, and that ended up ending their season. But I think the way that roster came together, coaches and players, truly a remarkable accomplishment in 2024. And I agree. I think they're here to stay. I'm rooting for them to stay. And I think they can potentially run the DFW area, which brings me to my next question. The Big 12 championship, obviously now with Texas and Oklahoma gone, a little bit of a power vacuum. Arizona State comes out of nowhere to fill that vacuum this year. Love what Kenny Dillingham is doing in Tempe. But our listeners want to know, between Texas Tech, Baylor, and TCU, who is the closest to winning a Big 12 championship?
I think it's Texas Tech. And it sounds weird to say because those other two teams you mentioned have played for or won a Big 12 title. I think TCU was a co-champion, of course, way back in 2014. Baylor has won 3 in the last 12 years, I think it was. Of course, TCU didn't win it, but they went to the playoff. But I think it's Texas Tech. From where they are on a roster standpoint, they've raised the floor at Tech. Okay, I think they're 23-16 the last 3 years. I'll have to double check that, but I think that's right. People are gonna say 23-16. That doesn't seem great. You know what? That's the best 3-year stretch they've had since the Mike Leach era. Okay,
Yeah.
And they're going to bowl games every year now. Again, not a thing that happened except for like Mike Leach era. At least not since then. So Joey McGuire and company have raised the floor. So that's number one. Number two, you go and spend more than $10 million in the portal. And, buddy, they were beating out Big Ten and SEC teams for players. They got offensive line questions. Let's bring in 3 offensive linemen. You got some defensive line help that you need. Let's go get the top edge rusher in the portal. Let's go get three other D linemen. Let's go get a running back. Let's go get some DBs. I mean, they did a terrific job. They were organized. They attacked it. Obviously had money to spend. James Blanchard, the GM there, of course, we know he was flirted with the Notre Dame job and ended up staying. Him and Cody Campbell, who runs the NIL collective there, did a great job of making this thing go. And so now this is it. This is the all-in year. You got all that talent. You went and got Mac Leftwich, who I think is one of the most underrated offensive coordinators in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You got Sheil Wood, who turned around that Houston defense and made them one of the better units, and certainly one of the better units in the Big 12, and I think one of the better units in the country. That kept them in a lot of games that they had no business being in, considering how futile Houston's offense was. So you got 2 dynamite coordinators. You've got all this talent that you've added onto the roster, onto what was an 8-win roster, a good team that, you know, if you don't lay an egg against Baylor, maybe you're playing in the last week for a Big 12 championship game berth, you know? And that's what's going to be the big thing for Texas Tech is, can they get the middle of the season, scratch your head loss off the books? Because they've had it twice to Baylor. They had it 2 years ago, I think it was, and they had it last year. They've also had the opener against Wyoming on the road when they lost that one. This year it was, you had to survive to beat Abilene Christian. No disrespect to Abilene Christian, which was actually really good this year.
Sure.
But you had to survive that one, and then you know, without Taj Brooks, obviously didn't look great at Washington State. They've got to come out of the gate quicker. Baylor is in a really good spot too. Sawyer Robertson and Jake Spavital, that pairing has been terrific for them. Aranda got himself off the hot seat. They bring a lot of guys back. From a momentum standpoint, I think Baylor is going to be right in that mix for the Big 12 title. And TCU is the one of the 3 of these teams that we mentioned, probably the one that I feel least confident about. But I think that I actually like a lot of what TCU has going this year. The thing I want to see with TCU is get back to beating good teams, because I think They let an egg early in the season, especially on that loss to Houston and the really, really tough start that they had, and things were kind of going awry. But I thought they bounced back really, really well. And they won the games they were supposed to. Now I want to see them get back to beating teams at the top of the conference. But Josh Hoover, one of the best quarterbacks, or one of the most productive quarterbacks, certainly in the country. I think I think there's a lot to like there too. So maybe I want to see it this year, but I think TCU may have stabilized itself. Everything just kind of fell apart after the national championship run season, and you're trying to build the pieces back together, and it looked like this year that it might go off the rails totally, and they righted the ship. So give Sonny Dykes and his staff credit for that. They were able to kind of get some momentum and have a strong finish to the year and end up winning 8 games. If you'd asked me after the Houston loss that they'd win 8 games, I would have told you they're crazy. I would say they'd be a 5-7 or 6-6 team. But Baylor stabilized. So all these teams I think are going to be in the mix. They're going to be teams that we're going to be talking about in November in the Big 12 title. But if I'm picking one to have the best shot at it, it's Tech, just because of the talent, just because they went out and got that talent. And they've also, they're pairing it with a lot of experienced guys. They've coming back, and just 2 dynamite coordinators who I think are really, really great hires by Joe McGuire.
Love hearing the praise for Tech. We're big Tech believers on this podcast, have been for a couple of years now. You kind of answered my last question about Baylor and TCU in regards to the head coaches themselves, right? It seems like Dave Aranda coached himself off the hot seat. I mean, there was last preseason, he was one of the betting favorites to be the first guy unemployed by his school. A terrible start, but then they roar down the stretch and finish the year strong, even a competitive bowl showing against LSU. TCU, to your point, also stabilized, right? And ends up going 8-4 in the regular season. So last question for you tonight. Are both of those coaches, would you consider them safe, or is there still a temperature check on their seats?
Well, I think they're safe for now, but you can't just fall off the table here. Okay, you can't go 5-7 next year, because then I think both of them put themselves in a tough spot. Aranda probably can less afford a losing season than Dykes, just because Dykes is taking his team to a title game. And
Sure.
I think that still buys you some goodwill. But I will say this. The further we get away from the national championship game appearance, the more everyone's memory at TCU will become clouded about what the end of the Gary Patterson era was, and we start thinking about the first 16 years of the Gary Patterson era, and we start comparing Sonny Dykes to that as opposed to what he took over, and because the program that he took over was not very good. The program that took over was basically a 500 program. So I think it's easy to forget that, because Gary's a legend, and Gary is the reason why TCU is even in the Big 12 and why TCU is on the college football map at this point in the program's history.
Yeah.
But it's hard to, for TCU fans, because of how much Gary gave the program and how big a figure he was. It's hard to kick. It's hard to kick that feeling. So it's hard to stop romanticizing and yearning for the times that you were winning 10 games every other year and playing for a Rose Bowl and things like that. So I think Sonny's always going to be working against that to some degree. That's not to excuse anything. Like some of the stuff you saw early in the year and some of the sloppy play, can't have it. I think they've learned a lot in the last couple years about culture, about what kind of guys to get in the portal, not just go grab talent, be smarter about your valuations. I think they're being a lot more measured in the types of guys they're taking, and I think you're going to see that come to fruition this year. But back to your question, I think whenever he loses a game, I think sometimes the TCU fan base just goes a little, whew, just because, again, it's like they were that close to the title game, and that they've had so much success in the 21st century. So in some ways, maybe Sonny is right there with Dave, because oh, by the way, they just lost the AD that hired him. Jeremiah Donati's gone on to South Carolina. So you're not going to have your guy. The one thing that Dave Aranda has in his corner in this discussion is Mac Rhodes. Mac fully believes in Dave Aranda. He did not want to fire him after the 2023 season. Obviously didn't. But buddy, I can tell you he was rooting for Dave Aranda to make this thing work. And at 2-4 at midseason,
Yes.
I promise you, we were getting ready for. I didn't think it was going to happen midseason, but I was like, let's get ready for a what went wrong with Dave Aranda at Baylor story for the end of the season, because it looked bad. The loss, the way they looked in some of those losses in that stretch, and I remember I think they went up 14-3 against Iowa State, and then the defense just looked listless the rest of that day. But then again, credit to Dave, credit to Jake Spavital, who was a terrific hire for them, and Sawyer Robertson, such a great fit. And also, again, credit to the staff for recognizing that, or just like Great Lashley at SMU. Got DeQuan Finn as a transfer, great decorated background at Toledo.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously got banged up a little bit, so that played into it, but it wasn't long for them to figure out who the right guy was for them. And those guys play for Sawyer Robertson. They believe in him. They've got some talent around him. You could tell, like, from an NIL standpoint, they're a little bit more invested in it. The recruiting class is better this year.
Yes.
So they're going. So I think to back to your question, I think they're actually kind of on similar ground. I think it's kind of hard to say which one would, if each of them took a step back, which one would be more danger? Probably Dave, just because the track record there, because they've already had multiple seasons. He was already on the brink as it was.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten to the brink with Sonny yet. We haven't gotten to the point where it's like, oh, Sonny's job is actually in jeopardy. I don't think we've ever gotten to that point at TCU. So I think Dave is probably a little bit on more tenuous ground, but I think for right now, both of them are pretty safe. Both of them are pretty on solid ground. And especially, and this is just considered every school, not just these two, but as we move into the rev share era and this money is going directly from the athletic department to the players, that is going to factor into hiring and firing decisions, because it's going to make you less likely to want to pay the buyout money, which is significant for both of these guys.
Yes. I think for Dave Aranda, the change that I saw from year one, when I had left St. Mary's University and I was working for an NIL company in Dallas, and Baylor was one of our biggest clients, and he did not believe in NIL. He could not have cared less about it. I mean, it was, you guys can do this, but I'm not going to support it. Right? We as the football staff are not going to support it. And seeing him completely turn and now have coaches, we pay players.
We pay players.
Right?
I love it. I need one of those shirts. I really do.
Right? I mean, to see that complete 180 and him accept the change and be willing to evolve with it, for me, that's stock up with Baylor, because you're right.
That's part of the game. That's part of the game. You got to adapt and you got to evolve, and you cannot be stubborn, because if you're stubborn, what they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that move, and I know it wasn't comfortable, and I still don't know that it is fully comfortable for him. Dave's a relationships guy.
Yes.
And he's got levels that I think not every football coach does. But look, man, in some ways it's a transactional game here, and you've got to pay the price to play it. And so, yeah, kudos to him, and kudos to the university. They put an apparatus around him to support him on that front as well. And Mac Rhodes recognized it. Javon Overshone, the deputy AD there, all those people around that program recognized what had to happen, and they've done it. And it's paid off in a big way. So,
yes.
I think that's a plus for them. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Like I said, the state of Texas this year is going to be a lot of fun, just because, like, look at all the teams we're talking about. These are all teams that are relevant and that have some reason for optimism as we move forward. So it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun this year.
A lot of community involvement, a lot of good folks down there in Waco that have worked with the administration to build that NIL program in a palatable manner. I think certainly some folks that I worked with that deserve a lot of credit in turning that ship around. But you're right, Sam. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got 100 something days until we kick off the next season, but a lot to look forward to here in the state of Texas. He's Sam Kahn Jr., the Techspert, theathletic.com, at skahn Jr. on Twitter. please go give him a follow. One of my favorite follows. And like I said, I love reading your work. Sam, I appreciate you stopping by the show and talking ball, the good, the bad, college football, everything in between. It's been a blast tonight, my friend.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate you guys, the Jimmies and the Joes, for hanging out with us. For Sam and Mitch, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about